Welcome back. Let's talk a little bit about the flute. The flute is by far the most foreign double for a reed player. It does not have a reed, and the challenges of tone production are really the biggest challenges you'll find. The fingering system is very similar to saxophone. There's a few little subtlety differences, but you'll find that your fingers are going to come together quite easily. It's just really getting a sound that isn't all airy and spread and everything is really tough. And so I want to show you some things that will help with that. First of all, the flute uses a cold air stream, which means that it's a fast, not that much air really, but moving very fast. To get it to move fast, we have to come through a small opening. On the book, I've written out the Venturi wind tunnel principle and illustrated why this is the case. This is more an oral example of the things that you can read in the book. But I need that teeny hole. That's probably the biggest challenge. Most people play with the hole way too big. There are also some other things that are critical. Lower lip is very relaxed, very spread out. Kincaid thought it should be an arch. The shape of this should be an arch. And you see that it is. It droops down. Then the flute comes up from underneath and it sits on top of the flute. Now, if I do that right then, you'll see that it actually lays across the whole embouchure plate. It's laying on the plate from here to here. I'm not pulling the lips back away from the plate. It lays out on the plate. So the first step I usually give young students is pout. You ever been mad at your brother or sister, mad at your parents? Just pout. All right, now bring the flute up from underneath. By the way, I've heard a very stupid idea, teaching idea, that's been espoused considerably out there. I don't know where in the world this got started, but saying, put the flute this way, straddle, put the lips right in the center of the hole, the line of the lips, and then just roll it down from there. Wrong. You will never get the flute in the right place doing that. So if you've heard that, get rid of that. That is heresy. What I need to do instead is I need to bring the flute up from underneath and bring it up gradually until it sits underneath that lip. This. And then I've got to have a teeny hole. One of the ways to get the teeny hole, instead of making a hole, when I ask a student, form a small hole, you still get a truck through there. I mean a small hole. Probably can't even see it. How do I get that small hole? Here it's quite simple. I just lick my lips, put them lightly together, and just start to blow. Let the air poke a hole through the lips. The air will poke the hole and it'll be much smaller than if we try to form it ourselves. So, there's another thing that goes into this. What about the alignment of the lips? And if I've got the jaw withdrawn, like, hole is huge, throws the angle at an extreme angle. No. Lips are more or less even. However, teeth are pretty even. However, the upper lip comes slightly forward of the lower lip. The only way you can control that is with where your jaw is. You can't control the upper jaw, so you have to put the relationship with the lower jaw. So I want the upper lip just slightly ahead of the lower lip, so it's bringing the angle of the air down into the flute. The thing that causes the sound to happen is that air hits that split edge on the other side of the hole there, and that starts it spinning. That's what makes it vibrate. So, step one, pout. Step two, bring the flute up from underneath, so we're laying all the way across. There's one other thing I forgot to mention. How much of the hole do we cover? All right, now, there's the entire hole. How much do I cover? Do I cover just a little bit like that, or a little more, or am I covering a lot? The answer to that is I should be covering 1/3 of that hole. So now if you take what's half of the hole, and then you back it off just a little bit, you'll be at about 1/3. I think that you tend to feel where the red and white line is on that edge, that inside edge of the hole. So let me start over assembling this. Step 1, pout. Step 2, bring up the flute from underneath until I'm covering 1/3 of the hole and the lower lip is laying all the way across the plate. Step 3, just kind of make sure that my jaw is roughly aligned. And then poo. That's what I'm calling when you just let the air poke a hole. Because it starts with a little P sound. Poo. I don't know if you can hear that or not. That will make a small hole. Now, there's a couple other things you need to know. I want to not have a lot of pressure from the flute on my chin. I can go down the line at a school and it'll be like, I try to push it away and I can't get it away very easily. It should be like, very easy to push away. Not a lot of pressure here. Sits in there snug, but not pressure. Well, that's a holding problem. It's a balancing problem. Kincaid would have said, you balance the flute. You don't hold the flute, you balance the flute. So what does that mean? It means my thumb goes underneath my first finger, and my little finger is down on the E flat key. If you don't know it yet, the E flat key is down on every note, virtually. And that's because that's how we hold the flute. But it's like a two-legged stool right now. It's very precarious. I need at least a third leg. And that third leg is the contact point on the chin. Now I'm very stable, just like this. I do not need my left hand to hold the flute at all. It has no holding function. However, there's a lot of weight on my little finger right now. And so what we do is we let the upper hand here collapses, and I let the flute sit on that table. Now I'm not gripping the flute. I'm not gripping with my thumb. In fact, I would play the thumb high on the thumb key, so you're not tempted to go underneath and try to hold the flute with it. You don't want to have anything holding from the upper hand. Instead, it just sits on that joint, and then my fingers wrap around. And that gives me the stability of having the flute held with the bottom hand. Now the beauty of that is that if I hold with the bottom hand, I don't need to press against my chin to get that stability. There has to be leverage to get stability. And the leverage comes from the thumb to the little finger. That's where the leverage is. I take a little of the weight off of that, but none of the holding function. You notice here, if I'm just got it sitting on the first joint of my finger. If I let loose of the little finger, it's like, the little finger is providing all the balance. I'm going to lose it. I'm not holding it with the upper hand. If I'm holding with the upper hand, then what will happen is I'll push from here against my chin. That's where my stability is going to come from. That's where the leverage will be. If you play for a little while and you find a big red indentation there in the first part of your index finger, that's going to be what causes the problem. That's going to show that there's a problem of pressing there to get some kind of stability. So I don't want to press there. I want to let the stability come from the lower hand, and the upper hand has no holding function. It just lets it takes a little weight, a little of the weight off the little finger, but never robs the little finger of its function of balancing the flute. If you get that right, then you won't have extra pressure here. Pressing here is like immobilizing the lower lip. Then it can't do all the flexible things that it's going to need to do, which we'll look at here in just a few minutes. All right, so holding the flute correctly will help a lot with that. Also, we need to realize that the hole should be in the center of the mouth. That hole should be centered in the center of the flute embouchure hole. And then there should be a right angle from the flute to the head. If I'm at a funny relationship here, this is more than a right angle. This is less than a right angle. This usually isn't a problem unless the students have been doing the core style of marching where they make them hold them up like that. But you want the flute and the head to perform. So if my head was exactly erect, then the flute would be exactly parallel to the ground. This isn't very comfortable. Usually the head's going just a little bit, so we let the flute. The head slant a little bit, then slant the flute to match it, so we have about a 90-degree relationship. We also have roughly a 90-degree relationship of the plane of the body and the plane of the flute. So that if this is my body, then the flute's perpendicular to it. However, everybody pushes a little forward of that. And things work better out here. I wouldn't go exactly 90, I'd go out just a little forward of that. All right, so those are most of the things that you need to know about just getting set up on this. It is a cold airstream, and so we have to have the small aperture here. We have to have good breath support behind it. It's going to be definitely a cold airstream. Once we get started, then from there, it's pretty much a matter of regulating airspeed. This is the whole key. If you are having a tone problem, it's usually because you have too much airspeed or not enough airspeed. If you're having an intonation problem, you're definitely having an airspeed problem. If it's sharp, you got too much airspeed. If it's flat, you don't have enough airspeed. If you're diminuendoing and it goes flat, your airspeed is slowing down too much. If you're crescendoing and it's going sharp, your airspeed is increasing too much. Everything is linked back to airspeed other than just raw finger coordinations, hand positions and coordinations of the fingerings. Really, it's all based on regulating and controlling the airspeed. Now, I've written some examples, drawn some examples, and written some things in the book that will really help to understand why the next things I'm going to say are true. But we control speed with the size of the aperture. The aperture is the size of the mouth. Really need to look in the book at that Venturi wind tunnel principle. It'll help you really to see this. But anyway, if the hole's bigger, you can hear it speed up. We need that faster airstream. That means I got to have that smaller hole. One time I was explaining this and a student said, oh, so in the low register you play with a warmer airstream and then when you go high you go colder? I said, no. You play with a cold airstream in the low register and it gets colder in the high register. Even at the bottom we have to be very focused here. So the hole is small and the drive against it is good. And there's one other thing that makes a big difference to the speed of the air, and that's the angle at which that air hits the side of the hole there. I compare this to a sidewalk, and I drew this in the book as well. But I compare it to shooting your hose at the sidewalk when you've got that high intensity nozzle on it, and you adjust the nozzle so that it's at the highest setting, and then you spray it at the sidewalk. Well, the angle that you hit the sidewalk is going to be the same angle that it comes off on the other side. And if you spray it more straight down, it'll come more straight up. If you spray it more farther out, then it'll bounce off farther out. Look at those diagrams in the book. It'll help to understand that. But the angle is changing speed. So when I angle more across, it speeds up. When I angle more in, it slows down. So three things that correctly control airspeed. The size of the aperture, the angle of the air, and the abdominal push. I was explaining that to one student, and he said, oh, you mean the 3 A's? I thought, that's a good way to put that. I've been calling it the 3 A's ever since. Aperture, angle, and abdomen. So the answer to nearly every problem that you've got to solve has to do with the 3 A's. So let's say I've got a tone problem. Not a good tone. Well, what's the problem? Well, it turns out that my tone is, I'm actually too high. I'm actually too fast. If I slow it down a little bit, it comes down in the center and we start to get a tone. Let's say my tone sounds like this. Too slow. Speed it up a little bit and it fixes it. Let's say I'm doing this. pitch is going down until it drops. So if I regulate the airspeed in coordination with how fast the air is going down, I can keep it more even. Or if I'm doing this, blowing harder, it's getting sharper, it's because I'm getting too much airspeed. So I'm going to regulate this. To make the natural compensations for this. So what is it I'm actually doing? If I need more airspeed, 3 A's. I got a smaller hole, raise the angle, increase the abdominal support. If I need less airspeed, then I only think of 1A, angle. There's something really unhealthy, especially considering how hard it is to get this hole small enough and how many years we work at that. It's really unhealthy to say, hey, you're going low, you need to make a bigger hole. Or you're sharp, make a bigger hole. Bad talk. I would never talk that way. Or, hey, I can tell you got a little too much airspeed, you need to support less. Don't support so much. No, this is really unhealthy. I would never, if I'm going up, more support, smaller hole. If I'm going down, I do not think about the hole or the support. I think about only angle. Angle the airstream down into the flute more. So I'm going down an octave. For faster, for slower. So I'm kind of overdoing everything here. Going up. I'll call it ooh. More ooh when you go higher. The ooh does two things. Smaller hole and raises the angle. And then I combine that with more abdominal push. If I'm going down, then just 1A, angle it down a little bit more. How do I angle it down? The droop in the corners. So I go ooh for more, and ah, oh for less. So pretty much all the exercises that we do help us to refine our muscle control here to be able to do that. So here's a warm-up exercise that we do. I've given you, in the book, there's a whole page of warm-up exercises. I think of the flute having focus areas. Low C up to E flat, fourth space, is the ah category where I'm a little more angled into the flute. Then from E up to the next E flat, about an octave, is I'm bringing the air angle up a little bit more. And then from high E up, angle up even more. So I call that ah for the low register, to ooh, to more ooh. Now my teachers called that top level E. To a clarinet player, that doesn't make any sense. Really? E? No, not like that. This is the French. Ooh. Oh, you mean just more ooh. So it's really ah, ooh, E, or ah, ooh, more ooh. But we have those ranges. And these aren't just arbitrary lines. You'll feel that there's an actual difference between E flat and E. Oh, okay, here's a half step from D to E flat. I don't really have to make much difference. Now a half step again, but from E flat to E. You can tell the E is all spread. Just for that half step, there's a pretty significant change to the more ooh, to ooh for the E. So I'm going fifths and octaves, E, B, E. Now if my lips are late, and you get stuff like that. So I actually anticipate with my lips a little bit. You see my lips moving before I try to go to the note. That's a great exercise for getting the mouth starting to do the stuff you needed to do. Another good exercise, what I call the pivot tone exercise. The lower I go, the more ah. So you kind of get the idea that I'm coming back, I'm just going down chromatic scale, but coming back to the same note every time. At first, these are close intervals, there's not much movement. As I get a little wider, more movement. As I get really wide, there's a lot more movement. The embouchure has to be relaxed and supple and move. If you're pressing here, you see the problem now. You immobilize that lip, it can't do what it needs to do. And I would use different pivot notes. I usually start with that G for younger students because it's a little more easy, but I rarely start there for myself. Usually when I'm doing the exercise myself, I start on a high C. Need to work on those. Run out of breath this slow. And you can keep working up. Ultimately, like, so on. Until I'm doing like 2.5 octave jumps, and the mouth figuring out how to handle that. Check this out. I'm actually doing the overtones. I'm doing up an octave and then up a fifth to the next overtone without moving my fingers. So on. So I'm going up an octave and a fifth. That's actually a very good exercise for getting that mouth to do those 3 different categories. However, when I started giving it to young students, they would be doing this. No, don't do that. We don't want all that tension and all that blowing and all that. No, we want to be able to do it with just the lips. And so I found a little later another exercise that does the same stuff, but you can't blow harder and you can't get all uptight and tense. You have to do it right or you don't get it. So check this out. The lower you go, the harder it is to get that low one. The most important one to get is that low one. When you get the low one, you're in the low embouchure position. That is the low embouchure. So for example, I'll go, after I've done this a while, and really 10, 15, 20 minutes of whistle tones works miracles. But let's say I've done it for a little while, and then I'll maybe do it this way. Keep the same embouchure as a low whistle tone, add air, and I've got real tone. I didn't mention that, by the way. To do whistle tones, I'm doing all exactly the same embouchure, same support, but the hole is big, and I'm blowing a really breathy, light, very light air. Hole's too big. So to go to real tone from there, I just have to blow a little more and let the hole focus in. That's a way of developing your low register. After I've done that, I might do something like this. I'm really banging these notes out to see if I can focus them where they don't pop up an octave. So, you can tell I haven't been doing this lately, but those are the things that will really help us to start happening. I needed to mention this a little while ago, but I mentioned that we do that poo. It's very light air, and it's a very small hole, but it's not enough air to get the flute sound off the ground. So I have to add some air to get the sound. Well, what happens when I add the air to that? I got the small hole. It blows the hole out. Not good. So we have to create a little bit of resistance here to having the hole blow to pieces. This is where the muscle, it works toward the middle. It doesn't ever pull back. Pulling back is your worst enemy on the flute. I see people that try to do this. It's negative. This is one of the reasons you should always practice the flute first. If you're in a doubling routine, practice the flute the first thing of the day. You don't want to be trying to do this after you've fluted your embouchure with the clarinet or the oboe. Always flute first. I did that for years. And then after a while, I started playing the flute second because I felt like I was getting the thing fairly together. I wanted to see if I could go there from the clarinet. So I'd make myself play the clarinet first, and then I'd have to go to the flute afterwards. Which reminds me that I like rotating practice. After a little bit, it's 10 minutes of clarinet, 10 minutes of flute, 10 minutes of saxophone, 10 minutes of flute, 10 minutes of clarinet, 10 minutes of flute, 10 minutes of saxophone, 10 minutes of flute, or you can throw the oboe or whatever else you're working in there. 10 minutes of clarinet, 10 minutes of flute, 10 minutes of oboe, 10 minutes of flute, 10 minutes of saxophone, 10 minutes of flute. It could even be 10 minutes of flute, 10 minutes of piccolo, 10 minutes of flute, 10 minutes of piccolo. But those rotating practice things are really helpful to a doubler to start learning how to make those changes back and forth, because usually we get about 4 to 8 measures to do that. Maybe you only 2 sometimes. But here's the thing. There's no tone without resistance. On a reeded instruments, the reed helps us to create that resistance. On the flute, there's no natural resistance. It's player-made. The resistance comes from an inward controlling of that hole so it doesn't just blow to pieces. But this all works within a relaxed context. I think this is really important to understand. Let me back up a little bit so you can see more of me. So, right now, you can tell that I'm using a lot of muscle. Yeah. But now, I'm not using muscle anymore. Oh, wait a minute. Of course I am. But I'm not using it in a tense context. I don't have the muscles tensed up. I have the muscles relaxed. The muscles are still working within a relaxed context. This is what I have to do with the embouchure muscles here. Within a very relaxed context, I still have muscles that are controlling that hole so it doesn't blow to pieces. Low register, very difficult. Try to get power down here. How do I get that power without it going? I think this is the problem that most of us have, and people find the answers by, well, maybe a bigger hole. idea, bad idea. How do I really do it? By angling the air into the flute with the aw. The embouchure needs to develop this kind of fine-tuned muscle movements. The whistle tones do a wonderful job of that. The fifth and octaves, the pivot tone stuff that I was showing you, all those things are really helpful for getting these things developed. In fact, I think the whistle tones are the closest thing there is to a cure-all. We know there's no such thing in mortal life here as a cure-all, but if there was, it would be the whistle tones on the flute. They cure more things than you can imagine all at one time. The dynamic exercises, remember, I've given this for all the instruments, but here it is on the flute. If I don't keep the airspeed up, it's going to drop. It'll go flat, and then it won't be able to sustain the octave, and it'll drop an octave. So at first I kept the airspeed up more, but how am I doing that? More of the 3/8. So that when I'm playing softer, I got to have more of the 3/8 to speed the air up. Do I really want to speed the air up? No. I want A440 to be A440, whether it's loud or soft. But I have to think faster air to compensate for the fact that the airspeed is going to drop big time. That's where the airspeed is dropping too much to even sustain the octave, let alone the pitch level or the tone. So now loud, soft. You see the adjustment I have to make there. So how do we make all these adjustments? And this is for dynamics, it's for register change, it's for getting your low register happening. It's for pretty much everything that we do. 3/8. The angle, the aperture, the angle, controlled with the oo, and the abdominal support. Angling down, controlled with the ah. So that's it kind of in a nutshell. I do have to mention that there are some negatives to watch out for real quick. I know we're getting long here. Let me just try to wrap up quickly. There are some negatives we have to be careful of. These are on my incorrect ways of influencing airspeed list. First one. Blow harder. Okay, if I blow harder, do I get more airspeed? Yeah. What's the downside? Can't do it soft. Can't do it with finesse. Can't do it in a subtle way. What if I want to go? I want the last note just to evaporate. I can't do this in blowing harder. To blow harder to get up there, trouble. So, negative. Second thing, this is more of a beginner problem. I can get more airspeed by exploding with the tongue. Now, it won't stay there unless I add more air. I have to use more air too. I have to blow harder. In other words, if I just explode with the tongue, it'll go back down. So I have to combine the two. Now I'm exploding with the tongue, and I'm blowing harder. That's a pretty crass beginner kind of problem. After a while, we can overcome that. We don't have to tongue to go high. But at first, your young students will try to do this. A much more advanced problem. We want to go from C down to E. The lips aren't doing what they're supposed to, so I'm getting an overtone. So I try to compensate by having a little stop in the glottal here. That stops the airspeed just long enough to let it drop down to that E. Well, what's the downside of that? I can't slur. I can't have smooth, really pretty playing that way. Plus, I have the extra noise of the glottal thing that's happening. I don't want that extra peripheral noise either. So, stopping the airstream or regulating the airspeed by trying to interrupt the airstream in one way or the other is not good either. This is probably the most violated thing. Okay, I want to change the angle. Several ways I can change the angle. All right, well, it actually can change the angle. But what's the downside of that? Well, for one thing, it looks stupid. It's also not agile, and it really gets in the way. You can't do that fast and agilely. So it's a problem. The jaw can be a similar problem. Okay, it can be effective, but again, it's sluggish and it looks awkward. You don't want your jaw to move. That's just the flesh moving over the top of the bones, not the bones. Now, if I move the bones, we don't want those bones moving. Just the skin. So if the head is moving or the jaw is moving to help control angle, that's a problem. Here's the really big violation though. Would you roll the flute to bring the angle more into the instrument? Most people would say, well, no, I wouldn't do that to go down like that. Yeah, well, would you do it if you're sharp? I bet this has been said in every band room in the country at some time or other. You're sharp, roll in. You're flat, roll out. Okay, are those things effective? Yeah. What's the downside? Every time I change the angle of the flute, every time I roll the flute, where you can see this, I hope. Every time I roll the flute, I'm changing hole coverage. If I change the hole coverage, I change the tone. I didn't maybe make a big enough deal about this a while ago, but if I cover more, it chokes it. If I cover less, spreads it. Changes your tone when you change your hole coverage. We don't want to be doing that. We don't want to change our tone every time we want to change our pitch. Now, I use that in a jazz setting. Rolling thing can be effective for things like that, but in normal classical playing or symphonic playing, we wouldn't do that. What do we do then? Do not teach rolling for intonation adjustment. Kincaid talked about that. He called it the fixed embouchure approach. When I first heard that, I thought, fixed embouchure? No, the embouchure is what's doing it. Can't be fixed. He was talking about the flute hole, the flute embouchure. This is called the embouchure of the flute. This plate, this is the embouchure. Fixed in that it's not rolling around, is what he meant. He said, if I ever have to roll my flute to play with somebody, to play in tune with somebody, I'll never play with that guy again. Well, we don't all have that option sometimes, but Kincaid could control that. But so if I'm changing pitch, let's take a high F sharp, tough note, and a hard note to bring down to pitch that's sharp. Let's say I get this sharp. Okay, I'm bringing the pitch down, but what's happening? Choking the sound out by rolling in. What if I don't roll in? Just by maneuvering my embouchure. I'm doing extreme things here, so it's dropping around. I'm sorry, but when I angle down, pitch comes down, tone is still just as big. Haven't changed the tone. So we really don't want to roll the flute to do these things. So my negative list: blowing harder, interrupting the airstream either by tonguing or glottal stops. Extraneous ways of changing the angle, such as moving the head or the jaw or rolling the flute. All bad ideas. Because, are they effective? Yes, but they're bad ideas in my mind because they have negative consequences. You cannot use them in many situations and have a nice consequence, nice product. So we try to avoid those things. One of the biggest problems is airy tone. I probably should address that real quick. Airy spread tone. What's the problem? I got to have more airspeed. Mostly that's a matter of making the hole smaller. A little more support, focus forward. But there's a couple of things to watch out for. You do not want to have your jaw pull back too far. That'll ruin everything. Usually it's because the hole's too big. It can also be because the jaw is withdrawn. So I have a beak, I have an overhang too much. And it happens because of warm air. We need the fast air. I think I should just mention vibrato and then we'll get out of this. Vibrato is a normal part of flute playing. Vibrato is a pulsation of pitch, loudness, and timbre. On the flute, it seems better to teach it as a fluctuation of loudness, whereas on the saxophone or the clarinet, I would teach it as a fluctuation of pitch. On the flute, it seems better as a loudness. It's louder, softer, louder, softer, louder, softer. And we do that at first with the stomach, abdominal. I only do this so fast though. I'm doing it really raw. As we work on the speed of that and we amp up the speed, it can't stay there. It has to move up into the throat. You get into a lot of fights talking about this with people. Our invisible pedagogy causes trouble when we start discussing these things with people because they have opinions born of past teaching or what have you. And people will say, no, it never goes into the throat. You put it in the throat, it goes too fast. You get that nanny goat vibrato. That's kind of the attitude in the flute world, only if you haven't schooled it. Now, one of my teachers was Eugene Foster. He was the principal flutist of the Utah Symphony, but he had studied with Kincaid at the Curtis Institute. And when I first went to Foster, I was pretty self-made, and I was doing my own vibrato my own way, and he stopped me very quickly. He said, no, we do not vibrato. We're not going to vibrato until you have a really wonderful tone. Vibrato covers a multitude of sins, and we're not going to use the vibrato until your tone is great without it. And I remember that was something that was looming there for quite a while for me. It was frankly a year later when finally it was, okay, let's start the vibrato today. It's like, burst the buttons off my shirt. Man, I must have arrived. Well, when he introduced vibrato to me, he didn't introduce it in the standard way that flute players do, which is from the abdominal. They call it diaphragmatic kicks. Pushing from the diaphragm. He actually introduced it this way. He said, we're going to do hard throat exercises. This is actually the false vocal cord. I'm not tonguing. I'm with my false vocal cord. We work it in rhythm with the metronome down the scale like that. And then he said, okay, now let's do soft throat exercises. Well, what's happening here? I actually, in a different video, in the articulation video, in that chapter on articulation, I talked a bit about the laryngeal mechanism, your larynx, false chord, true chord. I think that the hard throat exercises are the false chord, and the soft throat exercises are the true chord. I think when you work from the abdominal diaphragmatic kicks, and you speed up, it automatically, sympathetically moves up until it's vibrating in that true vocal cord area. I think it's probably best to work your vibrato abdominally in rhythms with the metronome first, and then gradually speed up, and it'll naturally do that. But if I have a student that's having a lot of problems with that, I'm not afraid to say, okay, let's do some hard throat and some soft throat exercises. We're going to get there either way. Most flutists really don't even know that they're doing it there because it moves up sympathetically and they don't even realize it's moving up there. But it will move up there, and I don't have a problem with starting it there if I need to. But we need to work it with the metronome, gain control of the width and speed, and it's, well, on the soft part of the cycle, it's going to get softer, but it's also going to get flatter, and it's also going to be a lackluster tone. You can't separate these elements. It'll be all three. We've gone way too long on the flute here. Let's take a break, and then we'll move a little bit to the double reeds, just a few concepts if you wanted to try to work with the double reeds. All saxophonists who want to work have got to play the flute and the clarinet. So I spent the most time on the flute and clarinet. But you enhance your chances if you play some oboe or bassoon. So I'll be back in just a minute.